whenever things like this happen and I comment on it, there's always somebody who comes into the comment section and says, Arthur, I can't believe you're responding to a comedian, or you're responding to some celebrity or whatever like that. My very simple internal response, and sometimes I'll respond to people like this by saying, maybe they should just shut their mouth and not talk about things that they know nothing about. I shut my mouth on plenty of things that I don't know about. My opinion on quantum mechanics means zero because I don't know the subject, and so I don't talk about it. Just because you got an opinion on religion and Christianity doesn't mean you know what you're talking about, and you're not actually at liberty just to say whatever nonsense that comes to your mind and your head. That's just the simple reality of what this should be like. Just be quiet, say, I don't know, and move on. Here's another one of those conversations we're going to look at. And I don't know who Di Stefano is, but Bill Maher, we know very well. And he talks about Jesus quite a bit. And Di Stefano here, I guess, he's trying. He's trying. But maybe it's the way for you guys not to do evangelism if you're a Christian. Or if you're even a Christian and just learning this stuff, it makes sense for you to just reason through it beforehand before you try to explain it to someone else. Because you ought to do a better job than this. So, let's check out this conversation.
Jesus, by the way, we'll talk about that.
Oh.
I'm reading The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. It's convincing evidence.
What do you think? I throw people out of the club here? We believe in whatever you want.
I didn't. I went to Catholic school my whole life, but after reading this book, Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, the factual evidence that he existed is kind of overwhelming.
I'd like to see that because the factual evidence that he existed has always been underwhelming.
Okay, so there's a claim made. We got to look at the claim, and we'll see where it goes. Reading the book by Lee Strobel and the factual evidence that Jesus existed is overwhelming. Yeah, I mean, Jesus existed. The question's not. When it comes to Christianity, and when somebody says, I believe in Jesus or I believe in Christianity, it is beyond just Jesus existed. That could be like easily solidified, right? Like Jesus existed. So what? That would be my response. My response would not be what Bill Maher says. That in my experience, I thought the evidence for Jesus existing is underwhelming. Like, then you don't know what you're talking about. That's just frankly and simply the case. With all due respect, you are ill-informed, uninformed about the subject. Plain and simple, move on. It's probably a waste of time for me to sit there and explain to you that Jesus actually existed. Go take a history class or two. I mean, get all your really good atheist friends around you who know the subject, and ask them whether they think Jesus existed or not. And however you're going to do, your historical studies there. Again, it's not complicated. But let's listen to the rest of this conversation.
In fact, it's
read Case for Christ.
Yeah, I will.
Give it a shot by Lee Strobel.
This is based on what? Archaeological finds?
Archaeological finds.
New ones?
Theological finds.
What are theological finds?
Bill, ready for this?
Yeah.
If I told you, okay, Alexander, if I told you factual.
I love it when like somebody, this is what we call a philosophy 101 syndrome. When somebody takes a philosophy 101 class, they're just really, like realism, anti-realism, and they don't know what to do about it. And they're like, I got something for you. Pay attention to me. I got something for you. When you look at your hand, what are you really looking at? Have you ever thought to yourself whether you exist or not? And then they're like tripping out, right? Now that's even worse if you're, drinking a lot and doing drugs at the same time as thinking about this stuff. But man, he's like, check this out. I got something for you. You won't believe it.
Evidence about Alexander the Great. You would believe me.
Okay, but even still, it's a silly point because who cares if Jesus lived? It's whether he's then died and...
Now, this is backtracking, right? Like, so he says, oh, the evidence for Jesus is underwhelming. And then he says, well, who cares? Well, this should have been his first answer. And, okay, it's a conversation between them two and their friends. That's fine.
He was reborn and is, up in heaven with his father who's really him. Okay. That's the part where the rubber...
Comments like these show me how ignorant of the subject an individual is who's talking about this. These are the little clues I get. So if I'm in a conversation with someone and they say, well, you Christians believe that, Jesus died and went to heaven and he's with his father who's really him, shows me that the individual is ignorant of the subject, plain and simple. They haven't taken some time to seriously evaluate the thing that they actually are going to deny, which is fine, but don't tell me you know what you're talking about.
Meets the road. Maybe he existed. I agree. That's absolutely possible. He may have existed.
But according to Case for Christ, independent sources who didn't know each other, who wrote about him within...
Okay, look, I'll do. I really hope and pray that this dude really believes in Jesus. I'm glad he's reading the the Case for Christ, and I hope he reads other books. But you can't just read one book. Like, I got this. Like, I read this one book, and like everything becomes like according to this book.
In 20 years of his death, talked about these miracles happening as in real time.
Okay, well, again...
And Alexander the Great's biographers, the earliest one was like 100 years after he died.
Chris, I'm going to have to burst your bubble now, because I have to spit a couple of facts at you that are kind of going to under... Okay, there's only two sources in the Bible. Okay. There's the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark...
Okay. Okay, so again, two guys that are talking about something they don't know well. So there is 2 sources in the Bible, and then you name 4. 4 sources, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That just because they're one genre of things, like they're one Gospels, doesn't mean they are the same. You realize this is partly also the reason why we call 3 of those Gospels the Synoptic Gospels, because they're similar to each other and one of them not.
Mark, Luke, and John.
Okay. There's also another guy, Josephus, who wasn't accepted. But
I don't know. Josephus shouldn't be in this conversation. Like, really, it seriously should not.
Not in the Bible.
Okay.
But the Bible is itself an anthology. They found few decades ago the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were other books that were just basically edited out. So
this is not true. This is such an uninformed comment. The Dead Sea Scrolls had nothing to do with this. The Dead Sea Scrolls have nothing to do with the New Testament, guys. They're from the Qumran community, like dated 200 years before Christ. Like, what are you talking about? He's going to go into like the, go-to stuff about Christianity was invented in, Council of Nicaea and Constantine.
Right away, we know a person decided what constituted the Bible, and just some stuff wound up on the cutting room floor.
I get it. Council of Nicaea. I get it.
Council of Nicaea, yes.
325 AD. Yes. That's when they decided the Christian religion. I agree with you.
Right. Okay, this is the problem with the internet. Like you can just take comment. Like, the guy says something, and he's like, Council of Nicaea, 325 AD. And then people are like, oh, this guy must know what he's talking about. No, you're just saying dates and names. Nobody decided Christianity in the Council of Nicaea. The plenty of Christians have already responded to the very simple fact of what took place at Nicaea. The Council of Nicaea was a council of bishops that got together to respond to a heresy called Arianism, and they dealt with Arianism, put it aside, moved on. That's it. It's not complicated, but only people who don't know what they're talking about talk like this. And again, I'm not saying that to be like mean or demeaning, guys. But I also want people who watch videos like this and might stumble across my video because they watch this and come to see a Christian response to it or something, to realize there are individuals that act or think they know what they're talking about, and they're not. They don't.
Right. I do.
I'm with you on that.
I remember that.
But I'm telling you, read this book.
That's Emperor Constantine.
Shout out Constantine, Turkey, all that.
Well, the first one.
Constantinople.
Okay, so Constantine has nothing to do with Turkey. Okay? The Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, nothing to do with Turkey. The Turks come there much later. Like, just because, you know, those people took over that land and ended up taking over Constantinople and all that, you just think stuff. It's like, yes, Earth, astronomy, you know, space.
Well, the first one to change the Roman Empire to a Christian empire.
That is an incorrect statement. Again, your ignorance on the subject is showing. Armenia was the first country to accept Christianity as a national religion, not the Roman Empire. 301 AD. Props to my Armenians.
Decided all the holidays.
Took 3 centuries.
I get it.
Okay.
Listen, Bill, I'm with you on that.
But here's the important point.
Let's do it.
There's only these 5 sources.
A little bit more tequila, that's it.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
I'm wrecked right now.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Good boys.
Not contemporaries of Jesus. Not even close. Matthew. Okay. So they lived from.
Matthew is historically thought of to be as Levi, the disciple of Jesus. Mark is John Mark, who's a contemporary of Jesus. Plenty of people think John Mark is the guy who the Roman soldiers grabbed the clothing off of when he's running away. And they also, plenty of scholars actually think that the Last Supper was held in John Mark's home. And so contemporaries. Now, if you're talking about whether the books are contemporary to Jesus living, that's a different situation. Luke is a doctor friend of Paul. John is a disciple. To say these people are not contemporaries is just, again, I'm going to repeat myself. You don't know what you're talking about.
70 to 110 years after him.
I understand.
No. From 40 to 70 years after.
But they got their information from Joseph.
That's actually pretty good in regards to dating on Bill Maher's part, right? 40, like, he's dating Mark very, very early. Thank you very much, Bill. We'll take that. What this gentleman says after this is that they got their information from Josephus is just false. Like, what?
Who lived about 10 years after Jesus.
So already we're into a game of telephone. Okay.
Bill, yes, but
the other person,
I want to let you make a point. But let me just quickly. The game of telephone, yes, I agree with you at that point. But the game of telephone in Jesus' times, according to Lee Strobel in the case of Christ, was the simple fact of we're playing the game of telephone. There's 10 people here. The game of telephone, as we know it today, is you say something in my ear and then it goes around 10 times. And by the time it gets to you, it's something radically different. This game of telephone, this ancient game of telephone was, but you tell it to me, then the third guy confirms what you said before it goes to the fourth guy. So there's a level of checking, checks and balances.
Chris, you're working too hard. If you want to believe this shit, believe it. You don't have to convince me or
I'm just convincing you of case of Christ.
Or construct this scaffolding to which you hang this belief. Just believe it. It's all good. Okay. But
don't come to me and when you die at St. Peter's, I'm not getting you in.
But you know, I can't go there with you. It's just, you know, it's silly. And
well, I'm just saying it's nice the idea to believe in something. I'm just trying it on for size.
Here's also what's very interesting, and then I'll leave this subject. Excuse me. I think I've bored the audience with this before, but
what do you think? Barbara in Milwaukee gives a fuck? They turned this off. When they turned this off when they found out I wasn't.
Sorry for the cursing.
Yeah, like that's the kind of audience we have.
Your audience is great.
So
you think they'll like me?
St. Paul,
good guy, St. Paul, aka Saul, and the
If I were to have a conversation with this gentleman and like every other word I said, he like cut me off and said like, good job, 301 AD, Josephus. I'd just be like, bro, let me finish my thoughts, please.
Capital of Minnesota.
Is the other source of the Bible.
Yes.
There's Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. I said the 2 names.
Again, ignorance on Bill Maher's part that Paul is not the only author in the New Testament, right? So if we were to name the authors in the New Testament, it would be Mark, Matthew, Luke, John. Luke wrote Luke and Acts. John writes the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, the book of Revelation. Paul, who writes the Pauline letters, all of them. You get James, you get Jude, you get the author to the book of Hebrews, who we don't know who it is. There's debate over that. I don't think I'm leaving anyone out. But definitely not 2 sources.
names out of order because that's the order in the Bible. The first gospel, Mark, is 70 AD. Jesus dies in 33. So that's 40 years almost after he died.
Okay.
So not contemporaries. Paul comes before the gospel writers. He's writing around the year 50, in the 50s.
Okay.
So he's much closer to Jesus' time. So you'd think he would know more about Jesus than the people who came later, but actually St. Paul knows almost nothing about Jesus. He barely conceives of him as something that, as a person who lived on earth. There's no details about his life like they are.
Like, Paul's the guy who literally speaks about Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. Like, what are you talking about?
In the Gospels. So the people who came later know more than the person who wrote earlier. Just some food for thought.
But,
Wrong
okay,
food for thought.
I understand.
Folks, please don't listen to what Bill Maher's saying about Jesus. Like, please. Like, this is not even challenging. This doesn't even remotely become an issue where a Christian should sit there and say, wow, Bill, you said something that I got to seriously think through. I mean, if you're the person who actually does that, then you need to seriously do some studies on your Christianity.
He does acknowledge at some point, right? Paul, a.k.a. Saul, knows that Jesus existed, right? He talks about him.
He talks about, I'm saying he conceives him as a Godhead. He doesn't have this, it's not.
Have you read John chapter 1? Again, you read the Gospel of Mark very clearly. Jesus is taking on divine roles. You read Matthew, Jesus is saying stuff that very easily conveys the idea that he is God. Who can forgive sins but God? Well, Jesus can. What does that mean?
The narrative that's in the Gospels of Jesus went around and he did miracles and he did stuff and everybody loved him and he gets quoted a lot. He makes speeches, blessed are the meek. You know, he has adventures. He goes into the desert. It's a whole thing.
But what about...
And then at the end, it's a whole drama with, you know, he's crucified. Oh, no. Paul doesn't know any of this. All the stuff that the gospel writers obsess about and that are his biography. It's a little strange.
That's not true, guys. That's just... What am I going to say? It's just false.
But Paul, it's okay for Paul to be somebody who maybe, there was a lot of people who didn't like Jesus.
You know what's okay?
And that's okay.
What's okay is that some people believe and other people don't. That's what's okay. It's like, that's you.
Well, it depends what that means. I mean, it's not okay. If Christianity is true and you're going to go to hell, that's definitely not okay.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to put it on you. I'm just saying what I believe.
I know.
And you should be trying to put it on him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Neither do you.
Is that really your mother?
There you go, guys. I mean, look, frankly, here's the reason why I'm doing this. I mean, I prefer not to do this and respond to silly stuff like this. Because people will watch this and think that Bill Maher knows what he's talking about. And that because these guys are sitting there and they say things like, yeah, 325, Nicaea, Paul, also known as Saul. And people are like, wow, like I didn't know this. These guys are very knowledgeable on this. It just frankly proved to you that they don't know what they're talking about. Please don't listen to them. And if you're going to take these subjects seriously, go listen to a serious person on it who knows what they're talking about.